There is a sentence in Psalm 23 that almost nobody stops to examine carefully, and it is the one sentence in that psalm that Albert Camus, who spent his entire career insisting the universe is indifferent to human suffering, would have immediately recognized as honest. Not the opening line about the shepherd, not the line about still waters. The line that reads, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Camus did not believe a shepherd was leading anyone through anything, but he understood, better than most theologians who have ever preached this psalm, exactly why a person would still walk through that valley even when they had every reason not to. The convergence between the most comforting poem in the Hebrew Bible and the most unsentimental philosopher of the 20th century is not accidental. And the place where they diverge reveals something about the gospel that the comfort version of Psalm 23 tends to obscure. The psalm is attributed to David, and the attribution matters for understanding what kind of document it is. David was not writing from a place of settled theological certainty. The same collection of psalms that contains the famous 23rd also contains Psalm 22, which opens with the cry that Jesus would repeat from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And Psalm 88, which is one of the only psalms in the entire Hebrew canon that ends without resolution, closing simply in darkness, with no turn toward consolation or confidence. These are not the writings of someone for whom faith is easy or whose experience of the divine has been consistently warm and reassuring. David wrote in conditions of genuine threat, genuine disorientation, and genuine absence. He wrote as someone who knew what it meant to be hunted, to be betrayed by people he trusted, to carry the weight of moral failure so severe that a later psalm, Psalm 51, records what a person sounds like when they cannot find their way back to themselves. The 23rd Psalm, read alongside that whole collection, is not a denial of the darkness. It is a statement made from inside it, by someone who has earned the right to make it. The Hebrew word translated as the valley of the shadow of death is tsalmavet, a compound word that combines the words for shadow and death. Some translations render it simply as the darkest valley or the valley of deep darkness, attempting to capture the texture of the original without committing to a single interpretation. But the traditional translation preserves something important. The shadow of death is not death itself, but the region where death casts its shadow. The territory adjacent to the terminal. The place where the darkness is real, but the boundary between that darkness and what lies beyond it is not yet clear. Ancient shepherds in the Judean wilderness would have known specific ravines of this description. Narrow passages where the sun did not reach, where predators moved along the rock shelves above the path, where the footing was uncertain and the way out was not visible from inside. The geography is not metaphorical. It is a description of a real kind of terrain that David, who had himself been a shepherd before he was a king, knew from direct experience. The psalm carries that knowledge in it. It is a specific kind of interior geography. It is not despair. It is the ground you have to cross to get past despair, and the psalm does not describe it as avoidable. Camus published The Myth of Sisyphus in 1942, in the middle of the German occupation of France, which is not an irrelevant biographical detail. He was writing about the problem of meaning and the human confrontation with meaninglessness at a moment when the question of whether life has meaning was not theoretical for the people around him. His central concept, the one around which his entire philosophical project organizes itself, is what he called the absurd. The absurd is not simply meaninglessness. It is more precise than that. It is the collision between two things: the human being's irrepressible demand for clarity, order, and meaning, and the universe's total silence in response to that demand. The world does not explain itself. The world does not answer, and the human being cannot stop asking. The absurd is what happens in the gap between the question and the silence. Camus was careful to say that the absurd is not located in the world alone, and it is not located in the human being alone. It is located in the relationship between them. A world without a consciousness demanding meaning from it would not be absurd. A consciousness that had stopped demanding meaning would not experience the absurd. The absurd is a relational condition, produced by the encounter between a certain kind of creature and a certain kind of universe. This is important for understanding why Camus resisted every philosophical and religious system that claimed to resolve the tension, because any resolution that worked by eliminating one of the two terms, either by convincing the person to stop demanding meaning or by positing a universe that secretly has a great deal of meaning waiting to be discovered, was, in Camus' view, falsifying the actual situation. The tension is the truth. Living inside the tension without falsifying it is the only form of honesty he thought the situation allowed. Camus argued that this situation generates three possible reactions. The first is physical suicide, which he immediately dismissed as an evasion rather than a solution, since suicide eliminates the questioner without answering the question. The second is what he called philosophical suicide, which is the move of pretending that the silence is not silence, of accepting a religious or ideological framework that claims to answer the question when it has not actually answered it. He was suspicious of this position in all its forms, including religious faith, which he saw as a way of jumping to a conclusion the evidence does not support. He called it a leap, and he did not mean the word as a compliment. The third reaction, the one he advocated for, is revolt. The decision to continue living in full awareness of the absurdity, without illusion, without false comfort, holding the tension rather than dissolving it. Sisyphus is Camus' image of this revolt. Sisyphus, in the Greek myth, was condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time he reached the summit. The punishment was designed to be the perfect expression of futility, an endless labor with no completion and no meaning. Camus takes this image and inverts its emotional valence. In the last line of his essay, he writes, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not happy because the rock has stopped rolling, not happy because the gods have relented, happy because the refusal to be defeated by the futility is itself a form of dignity, a form of freedom, a form of revolt that the gods cannot take away even while the sentence continues." The walk through the darkest terrain, in Camus's account, is what every human being is doing at some point in their life. The only question is whether they make that crossing with honest eyes open or with borrowed consolations that will eventually fail. The point of convergence between Camus and Psalm 23 is the word through. David does not say the Lord leads his sheep around the valley of the shadow of death. He does not say the Lord removes the ravine from the path. He says, "I walk through it." The terrain is on the route. The darkness is part of the journey, and the person speaking the psalm is not surprised by this, not petitioning for an exemption, not promising that faith will make the passage disappear. They are walking through it. This is precisely what Camus called revolt, the refusal to turn back, the refusal to pretend the darkness is not there, the commitment to continue walking in full awareness of what lies ahead. Camus and David, separated by 3,000 years, agree completely on this point. The valley is real. You walk through it. Turning back is not an option the honest person takes. The second point of convergence is in the phrase, "I will fear no evil." This is not the claim of someone who has never seen evil, or who believes evil is an illusion. It is the claim of someone who is looking directly at the darkness ahead and has decided to walk anyway. Camus called revolt the appropriate reaction to the absurd, the decision to live without flinching in the face of a universe that offers no guarantees. The difference between cowardice and revolt in his framework is not the presence or absence of fear, but the decision about what to do with it. Fear is the accurate response to a genuine threat. The refusal to let fear determine the direction of travel is what Camus meant by revolt. The Psalm's formulation, "I will fear no evil," is not the suppression of the honest emotional reaction. It is the declaration that the emotional reaction will not be decisive. These 2 points of agreement, the necessity of walking through rather than around, and the refusal to let fear determine the direction, are real, and they matter. Camus was not a Christian, was actively skeptical of Christian claims, and would not have accepted the framework that follows in the psalm, but his precision in diagnosing the human condition inside that kind of darkness, his insistence that the only honest reaction is to keep moving with eyes open rather than close them, maps almost exactly onto what David is describing in those lines. The philosophical vocabulary is entirely different. The terrain being described is the same. The divergence begins at the 3 words that follow. "Thou art with me." For Camus, Sisyphus rolls the stone alone. This is not incidental to his philosophy, it is structural. The revolt he describes is the revolt of the individual consciousness against a universe that is genuinely indifferent, and the dignity he locates in Sisyphus is the dignity of the solitary figure who refuses to accept the indifference as the final word even while living inside it. There is no shepherd in Camus' version. There is no presence in the valley. There is only the rock, the hill, the human being, and the decision to keep pushing. The heroism is real. The loneliness is total. David's psalm does not operate in the same structure. "Thou art with me" is not a theological claim David has reasoned his way to from first principles. It is a testimony. It is the report of someone who has been in that ravine and has found it occupied by more than their own consciousness. The rod and the staff are not metaphors for psychological resources or inner resilience. They are the specific instruments of the shepherd's trade. The rod used to defend against predators, the staff used to guide and support. Their comfort is the comfort of concrete presence, of having someone alongside who knows the terrain and whose authority in it is established by something other than the walker's own willpower. This leads to the most theologically significant image in the psalm, and the one most completely outside anything Camus' account can accommodate. "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." A table is set. Food is laid out. The enemies are not removed, not defeated, not driven from the passage. They are present, watching, and the answer to their presence is a meal. This is not the imagery of revolt. Revolt is Sisyphus with his rock, alone on the hill, refusing to quit. The table in Psalm 23 is something else entirely. The transformation of a place of threat into a place of nourishment, not by the removal of the threat, but by the presence of someone whose authority changes the meaning of the space itself. Camus could not write this line. His philosophy has no mechanism for it. The darkness in his account remains what it is. The meal inside it is a category his framework does not contain. The closing lines of the psalm, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever," are lines that announce a trajectory. They do not describe the valley as the final destination. They describe the valley as part of a longer journey, whose endpoint is not more valley. Camus' Sisyphus has no endpoint. The boulder rolls down, and he begins again, and the meaning is located in the persistence itself, in the decision not to stop. Not in any destination, the persistence is moving toward. The psalm and the philosophy agree that persistence is essential. They disagree, completely and irreducibly, about whether the persistence is moving toward something. The person of Jesus enters this conversation at the point where the shepherd metaphor becomes explicit. In John chapter 10, verses 11 and 14, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." The shepherd imagery of Psalm 23, which David uses as a description of how the Lord relates to his people, is claimed by Jesus as a description of himself. This is not a minor theological point. It is the identification of the shepherd in the valley as a specific person, not an abstract divine principle, but someone who has himself been in the valley, who has himself walked through the shadow, and who came back. The route Jesus takes through the Gospel of John includes the valley of the shadow of death as a literal stop. The cross is the psalm's darkest verse, made historical. The resurrection is what changes the meaning of everything that precedes it. The shadow of death is a shadow precisely because death is the thing casting it. If death is the final reality, the shadow is permanent. The passage has no exit. Sisyphus rolls the stone forever, and the gods do not relent. And the only available reaction is revolt. Keep walking with clear eyes. Refuse to pretend the darkness is not real. Find the dignity available inside the sentence, even though the sentence does not end. This is heroic. It is honest. And it is the most that any philosophy built on the assumption of death's permanence can offer. But the resurrection, if it happened, changes the shape of what casts the shadow. Something that has been decisively defeated still casts a shadow during the interval between its defeat and the full visibility of that defeat. The walker is still in the ravine. The darkness is still the darkness. But the terrain is now a passage rather than a final destination, because the thing at the end of it has been entered and exited by the shepherd ahead of the sheep. Paul addresses this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 55, where he quotes the prophet Hosea and reframes the question entirely. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? This is not the language of someone denying the reality of death. It is the language of someone who has evaluated what death is capable of in light of the resurrection and found that its claim to have the final word is no longer credible. The sting is real. The valley is real. The shadow is real. But the entity casting the shadow has been met, engaged, and not allowed the last word. This is what the table in the presence of enemies means, and why it is set in the presence of enemies rather than after they have been removed. The enemies are acknowledged. The table is set anyway. The presence of the shepherd in the valley does not make the valley less dark. It makes the darkness less final. Camus was right about more than most Christians want to admit. He was right that the universe, encountered on its own terms without the addition of a theological claim, is silent in response to human demands for meaning. He was right that the honest response to that silence is to walk through the valley with clear eyes rather than close them. He was right that philosophical systems that dissolve the tension by pretending the question has already been answered are trading honesty for comfort. The 23rd Psalm does not contradict any of this. It does not tell you the valley is not the valley. It does not tell you the darkness is not dark. It does not tell you the enemies are not real. It tells you that something enters the valley with you, sets a table inside it, and will be present to you in it until the passage is complete. The Psalm's claim, and the Gospel's claim at the back of it, is not that Camus was wrong about the darkness. It is that the darkness is not the only thing present inside it. The question the Psalm and the philosopher leave open together, which is the same question and the only question, is not whether the valley is real. It is whether, when you are inside it, you are alone. Sisyphus rolls his stone alone and finds whatever dignity is available inside that solitude. The psalmist walks through the darkest ravine in the Judean wilderness and finds a table set, a presence that carries a rod and a staff, and the testimony at the end of it that goodness and mercy have followed every step of the way. The question is not which of these descriptions is more comforting. The question is which of them is true and what it would mean for how you walk through the next valley if it is.